All right, my love. This is going to be the third recording, and chapter 21 is titled Listen to the Wind. And it starts with Nynaeve, who you remember, and again, I'm summarizing because I need to remember myself too. She was following the group, and she ended up staying with the group. So she awakes completely by herself, but then she smells some smoke, and it leads her to where Moraine and Lan are. And she like kind of eavesdrops on him a little bit, and then she's like, then Moraine is like, "Come out of the forest." And Nynaeve steps out, and Lan is like, "The fuck?" Because he couldn't even tell that she was there. And Nynaeve is all like proud of herself for that internally. She's like, "I'm really good at hiding and sneaking and tracking." But then that begs the question: how did Moraine sense her? And Moraine says, "Well, people that can channel the one power can sense other people nearby that can also channel it." And then that's when you realize, oh, Nynaeve can use the one power just like Moraine and Egwene can. So then you find out Nynaeve also had a very powerful fever that almost killed her when she was a child. And they start talking about all the things that Nynaeve could do as wisdom of Eamon's Field, and she could listen to the wind and hear what the weather was going to be like and things that would happen. And her herbs that she used to heal people were very effective, far beyond what herbs should be able to heal. And what Moraine says is it was very easy to sense Nynaeve coming because Nynaeve's potential with the one power is so great. She is probably the strongest channeler that anyone in the White Tower has seen in hundreds and hundreds of years. Even though Egwene is the strongest potentially out of everyone, Nynaeve puts even Egwene to shame in potential. So Moraine accepts that Nynaeve is going to join him, and Nynaeve's like, how are we going to find the rest of our group? Moraine says, well, I gave each of the boys a silver coin, and that actually allows me to track them. However, it seems two of the boys have lost their coins. But the third boy is only a few miles across the river, so we can get up to them. And then they depart and try to follow the boy, who we know is Perrin because Mat and Rand gave the boatman their coin. Chapter 22 is titled A Path Chosen. So Perrin awakes by himself, but he's looking at the river, and he's trying to find Egwene since they got separated. And eventually, after walking for a few miles, he finds a hoof print by one of the horses that he knew was from Eamon's Field, because he recognizes the horseshoe that he and his master, because remember, Perrin was an apprentice blacksmith, if I haven't said that, it is one of the horseshoes that he or his master made. So Perrin keeps going, and he actually finds Egwene and her horse Bella, and Egwene like turns around and is like, oh she's got a branch that she's like holding like a club. But then she realizes it's Perrin. She's like, oh shit, I'm gonna dry you off from the river and stuff like that. Perrin suggests we should probably head towards Camlin, since that's where we were trying to go. And he's like, I know we were going to stop in Whitebridge, but the Fades, the Myrddraal, probably know that we were going to stop at Whitebridge, so we'll just bypass and go straight to Camlin. They also have a conversation about how the Two Rivers is actually part of Andor. And so the big city that they're trying to get to, Camlin, is the capital of the country of Andor. But, Two Rivers people, they don't really think of themselves as part of Andor because, like, they're so isolated by the mountains and stuff. They haven't seen, like, no one's come to collect their taxes in, like, 100 years, that kind of thing. So they consider themselves independent, even though on paper they're part of Andor. So chapter 23 is titled Wolf Brother. Ooh, Ariel, ooh. So Perrin and Egwene make their way to Camlin, and they take turns riding Bella since they only have one horse, and they're always like, it's your turn. No, it's your turn, because neither one wants to seem like they're the one that should be in the saddle. Perrin ends up winning that argument more often because he's a big tough blacksmith guy, and so Egwene ends up on the horse more often than not. And they actually go down like this for a few days, hunting as they go. Egwene trying to practice using the one power a little bit by like lighting campfires and stuff. But eventually, after a few days, they smell a separate fire, one that they hadn't made. And so Perrin goes off to investigate and finds a man near the fire, just wearing a bunch of fur. The man looks at Perrin and invites him over. Invites him and Egwene over to eat. So Perrin gets Egwene, and they introduce themselves, and the man says his name is Elias Mashera, excuse me. And Perrin is like, when he sees that Elias's eyes were bright gold, shining. And so he asks, like, what are you guys doing out here? And they're like, we're heading to Camlin. And Elias laughs at him, and he's like, well, based on the way you're going to wind up 100 miles north of it. And they're like, what? Well, can you show us where? And he's like, I don't like people, and cities have way too many people. I even don't like going near villages or farms and stuff, because those people, they don't like my friends. And Egwene's like, well, can you just tell us where to go? And Elias is like, quiet, my friends are coming. And 4 wolves come out of the brush, and they lay down in the fire. And Perrin looks around and sees there are even more wolves in the darkness past the fire. And he reaches for an axe, and Elias is like, don't do that. And Perrin, he's like, all right. And so Elias actually says, these are my friends. These 4 wolves are named Dapple, Hopper, Burn, and Wind. And Perrin's like, how can you talk to them? And Elias is like, well, the wolves were the ones that discovered the people. And the wolves are the ones that approached Elias. And he's like, they seem to know what I'm thinking and respond to it. And Egwene starts asking questions like, hey, can you teach us how to speak to the wolves? And Elias says, well, you can't teach it, but that guy can do it, looking at Perrin. And Perrin gets very uncomfortable. So Elias starts asking for a little more details about what they're doing here, and Egwene tells him a fake story, and Elias is like, you're lying. The wolves told me. And then Perrin makes a decision. He's going to trust Elias, and he tells him the truth. And Elias is like, when he hears about the Aes Sedai, he's like, I don't like the Aes Sedai. The Red Ajah tried to gentle me, thinking that my abilities to speak with the wolves were the one power. And I ended up having to kill a couple different warders because of it when they chased me. But he says the power to talk to wolves is older than even the Aes Sedai themselves, and it has nothing to do with the one power. And what that is implying is that his ability to talk to wolves should not drive him mad the same way that a man channeling the power would. Elias eventually says he will travel with them because Dapple is the leader of the pack, and Dapple says so. Burn, one of the other wolves, gets angry about it and goes off into the darkness. But he can feel. Perrin sits there and he's like, "Oh, but I can feel the wolves around me." A little more than he thought. Chapter 24 is titled "Flight Down the Arenelle." Rand is suddenly in a maze of bridges, and Baalzamon is within this maze. And Rand touches a bush, and it ends up, the whole maze, it turns out, is made of these thorn bushes, and Rand realizes this place is dangerous. He tries to escape and comes face to face yet again with Baalzamon, with his eyes of flame and his black dressing. And Rand is begging the light to save him, and Baalzamon says, "The light will not save you, and the eye of the world will not serve you. Rand then shouts, "This is a dream! This is only a dream!" And Baalzamon, in shock, fades away into nothing. Rand suddenly bursts awake and sees that he's aboard the Spray, the ship. And he's relieved, oh my god, it was just a dream, until he notices his finger is bleeding right where he pricked the thorn in the dream. So they progress on for a while on the boat, and Tom starts to entertain the crew, and he actually starts training Rand and Mat how to be apprentice gleemen. And so Rand starts to learn how to play the harp and the flute, and Tom is like, you have farmer's fingers. You can't play the harp. Yeah, stick to the flute. You're no good at the other one. And meanwhile, Matt is practicing juggling, which he's pretty good at. They pass a strange metal tower on the river, and Matt starts saying, "I bet that tower has treasure in it." And the guy who owns the boat, Doman Bale, he's like, "We're not stopping. We're gonna keep going." And so they sail past, and Matt just mutters, and he's talking about treasure under his breath. Kind of angry, actually, a little more angry than normal. Like Matt's just irritated. Although who wouldn't be at this point, right? So a few more days pass on the boat, and or on the ship, and they're just going south. And then Rand finds Matt and sees that Matt is holding something, and it turns out Matt is holding a curved dagger with a ruby the size of a thumbnail in it. And as soon as Matt notices Rand, he stuffs the dagger back in his cloak. And Rand says, "Did that come from Shadar Logoth?" And Matt says, "You can't tell anyone that I took this." Rand starts asking Matt if he's had strange dreams, and Matt says yes, but he doesn't want to talk about them. And so from this, we gather Matt has taken something from Shadar Logoth, probably from that treasure pile that they saw when that Mordeth had. And Matt is also showing a little bit of distrust. He doesn't quite trust other people and doesn't want them to know that he has the dagger because they'll try to take it from him. He also thinks the ship captain is out to get them, and he wants all the treasure in that tower and any treasure that they have as well. So chapter 25 is titled The Traveling People. And this goes back to Perrin and Egwene and Elias traveling. And Egwene's pretty nervous because they know there's wolves around and they can't see them. But Perrin can feel the wolves, and he tries, he doesn't really tell Egwene, like, don't worry about it, I can feel the wolves. But he just tries to assure her, like, you don't need to worry about the wolves. Meanwhile, all Perrin can do is think about wolves. He feels them around him when they're coming at him, when they're ahead of him, behind him. He's even dreaming of wolves at this point. After a few days of this, they travel and they find 3 very large dogs instead of wolves. And they start to growl at him, and Perrin takes out his axe a little bit, and Elias is like, no. And he whistles very loud. And after he whistles, the dogs just lay down, wagging their tails, and they're super happy. And Elias starts petting them, and he tells Egwene and Perrin, we must be near a Tuathan camp, the Tinkers. And Egwene's like, I don't want to meet any Tinkers. They're thieves. And Elias is like, that's prejudice. They don't steal any more than anyone else. And we should stay with them for a night. Why not? But he also warns them, don't listen to anything the Tuathans say. Their views on things are foolish, and you'll know what I mean soon. And then the wolves, they actually retreat a little bit because they don't like people. And they also don't like the dogs there, who, from the eyes of the wolves, have given up their freedom for safety. And so they approach the Tinker camp. Tinker and Tuathan are the same thing, by the way. Just 2 different names for it. And they see it's just a bunch of wagons. Tons of wagons, but they're all sorts of colors. And they're like houses on wheels, right? And the Tinkers themselves walking around the camp are wearing the most the most colorful clothing you could ever imagine. They honestly hurt Perrin's eyes because the colors were so varied and so bright. It was like blinding to look at compared to the drab clothing that, normal people generally wear. And they hear music and dancing, and the children are playing with dogs. And then they notice Perrin, Elias, and Egwene walking up. And as they do, everything stops. And they approach the Tinkers, and a man comes up to them and says, "You are welcome to my fires." And he asks them if they know the song. And Elias replies and says he does not know the song. And the man says, well, then the search continues. And he welcomes them to dinner, and everyone starts partying again. And we don't really know what that whole exchange means about a song. And so Egwene asks, like, what is this? And Elias says, it's what all the Tinkers are seeking. During the breaking of the world, their song was lost, and Their prophecy says that when the song is found again, the age of the paradise of the Age of Legends will return. The Tinkers don't know anything about the song. They don't know where it is or what it sounds like, but believe that they'll know it when they find it. And so the three of them go and join the leader of the Tinkers at the campfire, and meet the lead Tinker's family, his wife and his grandson Aram. And Aram seems to think Egwene is pretty fine, if I'm being honest. And he starts to flirt with her a little bit, and she's like, "Oh." But one thing Aram mentions is he mentions the Way of the Leaf, and Egwene is asking what that is, and Aram explains, like, a leaf lives a certain amount of time. It goes with the wind, it doesn't struggle against it, it harms nobody, and eventually it falls to the ground and nourishes new leaves. And so Perrin is like, what does any of that mean in real life? And Rain is saying, well, what that means to us is that no man should ever harm another person for any reason. Violence harms the person who does it as much as the one who receives it. And Elias gets really annoyed, and he's like, enough of that. People don't like the Tinkers because you're always preaching that and stealing people from their homes. And he doesn't mean that literally. He means it like they're convincing people to leave and follow their way of life, but they leave their families to join the camp. Yeah. And Aram goes away, and his grandfather, the leader, says, yeah, Aram is a good lad, but the Way of the Leaf is hard for him. And so they eat, and they're talking for a while, and smoking and stuff like that. And then the leader of the Tinkers is telling a story about how the Tinkers crossed the Ale Wastes about 2 years ago. And they came across these maidens of the spear, who went into the Blight, and they were attacked by Trollocs that followed them. And the maidens died except for one maiden who crawled to the Tinker's wagons to give them a message. And the message was, Leafblighter means to blind the eye of the world. He means to slay the great serpent. Warn the people, Sightburner comes. Tell them to stand ready for he who comes with the dawn. And then she died. And the Tinker leader asks Elias if he knows what this might mean, and Elias does not. Eventually, Egwene returns, having left with Aran, and it turns out they were dancing and laughing and just had a little private dinner with him. But then she suddenly goes up to Perrin and starts crying and asking him, please tell me that all of our friends are alive. And Perrin says, of course they are. And she gives him a little kiss on the cheek. And Perrin's thinking to himself, I wish Rand were here. He's always so good with women. And I'm terrible. I don't know what any of that just meant. Chapter 26 is titled White Bridge. So eventually the ship that Rand, Tom, and Matt are on arrives in Whitebridge. And Dolman, the shipmaster, or the captain of the ship, says, we're going down south all the way to Ilion. If you will continue to entertain the crew, we will take you there. But Rand and Matt are like, no, we need to find someone. And they're talking about Moiraine. And so they find an inn, get some rooms, and the bartender starts telling them about the false dragon, Logain, and how he could channel, and he was captured by the Aes Sedai to be gentled soon. He also tells them that the Hunt of the Horn has been called in Ilion, the Horn being the Horn of Valir. The Horn of Valir is of legend, thought to, when the horn is blown, it will call back the heroes from times past in the Age of Legends, and they will fight in the last battle against the Dark One. So the prophecy goes. And so there is a hunt for the horn called, where everyone's trying, hundreds and thousands of people are going to scatter to the winds all across the world to try to find this horn. Tom tries to convince Rand and Matt to go down to Ilion, and Matt is just getting very, very frustrated, and he starts clutching his dagger, barely able to contain his anger. But eventually, Tom gives up on his plan, and so Rand and Matt are like, "Why do you want to stay with us instead of just going to Ilion yourself?" And Tom tells them, he had a nephew named Owen who got in trouble with some Aes Sedai, and Rand thinks to himself, that probably means that Owen could channel, and he was probably gentled, but Tom doesn't elaborate any further. But because of how pushy the Dolmen and the innkeeper are being about conversations and trying to find out stuff, they decide to sneak out of the inn and run to Camlin. And so they divide their coin into 3 and sneak out of the inn. And Tom hands Rand all of his stuff so he can get a cloak, because Tom actually has a Gleeman cloak, which is like patched up. Like, imagine a cloak just made of different colored patches so that stands out very much. Everyone who sees that patchwork cloak knows that that person is a Gleeman, and so he has to go get a normal cloak so that he doesn't appear to be a Gleeman, because they want to blend in, not stand out, right? And so he hands Rand all of his stuff, and they start heading down the road, and a Fade appears. Tom turns to face it, and his eyes go white, and Rand looks at the Myrddraal, unable to move, and Tom yells at them, "Run! Run! Go to an inn in Camlin called the Queen's Blessing. I have a friend there, and he will help." And Tom faces the Myrddraal. Rand and Matt are able to run, and they hear Tom crying out in pain as they run, assuming Tom to be dead. Chapter 27 is titled Shelter from the Storm. Perrin starts to get annoyed at their time with the Tinkers, not because of their beliefs necessarily, although they'd look at his acts very disapprovingly, but more that he's worried that going at this leisurely, uncaring pace, the Trollocs are going to catch up to them. But Elyas tells them, just enjoy yourselves while you can. This could be the very last chance you ever have. And so Egwene is hanging out with Aram, and she's dancing with him every night and stuff like that. And the girls, a lot of the young girls seem to think Perrin is quite the catch with his very broad shoulders, and so they try to dance with him a lot too. Eventually, they perform a dance that made Perrin blush profusely, because it was what he would consider, in his very modest village, to be a very indecent, let's say, dance. But the girls are cracking up over how embarrassed Perrin is over it, that they do the dance every single night just to make him feel nervous. Perrin gets further embarrassed because Egwene also starts to learn the dance and performs it for Aram. And then this continues for some time, and Perrin starts lamenting his dreams, and he realizes he is still not safe from Baalzamon. He dreams one night of the 2 rivers, and he's walking with a wolf when Baalzamon appears. Perrin tells him that the wolves will not protect him, and kills the wolf in his dream. Perrin wakes up and sees Elyas, who says they have to leave. And so Elyas, Egwene, and Perrin thank the Tuathan for their hospitality these last few days, and they leave. And Perrin tells Elyas about the dream he had. I'm sorry, scratch that. As they separate, the wolves tell Perrin that they had a dream the same as Perrin. But Perrin closes his mind to them, still not willing to accept that this is reality. And then the other thing I would point out is that when the girls were doing their dances, Perrin is thinking to himself, I wish Rand were here. He would know what to do in this situation. And that's about it. Chapter 28 is titled Footprints in Air. Nynaeve, Moraine, and Lan make it to Whitebridge, and Nynaeve is pretty impressed by the size of the town, but she's pretty angry, having argued with Moraine a lot, and she does not trust Moraine, saying, oh, don't worry, I'll find them. And they see houses in the village, or in the town, have been burned, and there's a militia, like armed men, patrolling the streets. And after questioning some people, they find out that there was a boat owned by a shipmaster named Bail Domon, and the boat was attacked in Whitebridge, but it managed to escape. Moraine leads them to an inn, and realizes this must be the same inn that Rand and Matt were in before. She says the boys were very clearly afraid of something here, and Lan says there was a Myrddraal here. He can just sense it. At this point, not knowing necessarily where they are, Moiraine decides it's time I start looking for the one that has the coin still. If the other two were in Whitebridge, that means they must be heading to Camlin, and I will find them when I arrive there. Nynaeve is like, well, what about Egwene? And Moiraine tells her, I need to look for the boys. I'll look for Egwene if I'm able. Nynaeve starts thinking to herself, man, Lan would be so much more useful if he just didn't have Moiraine holding him back. Although Lan is very infuriating to Nynaeve because he barely speaks a dozen words a day, if even that. Chapter 29 is titled Eyes Without Pity. Perrin, Egwene, and Elyas start going south towards Camlin Road at a much, much more aggressive pace than before, but they're still taking every precaution to make sure they're not followed. They're not going on the top of hills, they're going around hills so that no one can see them at the top if someone were looking. They erase their tracks, they don't leave a sign where they camped, that kind of thing. And Elyas even sends out wolves to go scout ahead of them. But eventually they come across a hill that is miles wide in either direction, and they know there's no choice but to go up and down the hill. And when they reach the top of that hill, they spy ravens, about 50 to 100 of them. And Elyas realizes these must be eyes of the Dark One if there are so many, and they push for speed until the wolves watch the skies for the ravens, which is not something wolves normally do, not having aerial predators in nature. Eventually, the ravens start getting closer, and they sprint, and they are going as fast as they possibly can for a place of safety, as Elyas calls it. Perrin and Egwene have no idea what this place would be, but Elyas seems confident that if they can make it there, they will be safe from the ravens. The wolves contact Perrin, letting him know the ravens are behind, and Perrin tells the others, he relays this information, making Egwene realize Perrin can talk to the wolves. And now, at this point, there are many, many more ravens. Ravens are clouding the entire sky. They have slings that they shoot at one or two ravens that are getting way too close to them, but that's about it. Those are onesie-twosies. They don't have the means to take down hundreds. At one point, they see a fox, and ravens dive down quickly and just strip the flesh off of the fox. And right as Perrin feels like they're about to collapse from how exhausted they are from this mad dash, Perrin feels a chill, and Elyas tells them, we have entered a steading. A steading is the home of the Ogier, known only in the stories. Eyes of the Dark One cannot follow them there. Elyas leads them in further, and there ends up being water in there. And so there's a place for them to drink. And Elyas starts telling them the story of Arthur Hawkwing, because at the place by the river there's a statue that used to be a statue of Arthur Hawkwing, and how he ruled everything between the Aiel Waste and the Aerith Ocean, basically the entire continent. Imagine him like he ruled all of Europe, that kind of thing, like an entire continent all under his rule. Egwene shivers a little bit as they settle down, realizing, or she says she does not like the steading. She can't really give a good reason for it, but just something about it strikes her as bad or dangerous. Or at the very least, it makes her uncomfortable. And Perrin admits to himself at this point, based on the conversations he was having, he can probably feel the wolves from up to about a mile away. And then Elyas tells Perrin something very important. He talks to Perrin about the axe that he's using, and Elyas tells him, if you ever start to like that axe, that is the moment to throw it away. But as long as you hate the axe and hate what you must do with it, you must use it. And this is basically Perrin, who is not a violent man by nature, because Perrin, being so large even as a child, he always had to be very careful around people, and he was very capable of hurting others his own age because of his stature, his enormous size. Not fat, like he's a very muscular man, but he's just very tall and very strong. And he knows that the axe is very dangerous, and he does not like the fact that he has to carry it to be safe. Chapter 30 is titled Children of Shadow. Soon after this conversation, the wolves send Perrin a message, very urgent. They say there are many men on horses coming towards them, and so they quickly douse the fire and rush back to the camp. But there's no time to get rid of all their traces, and so they hide instead. Elias goes to the wolves and says he'll find Egwene and Perrin later on. Now they're in total darkness, but Perrin, surprisingly, realizes he can still see perfectly fine, even though it's pitch black out. The men on horseback get closer and closer to Egwene and Perrin's hiding spot, and eventually they're about to surrender, and then the men, starting to take them hostage, approach. And suddenly, Hopper the wolf comes out charging the bushes and attacks and rips out the skin of one of the men. And the men kill Hopper, and Perrin feels the wolf die in his very essence. And Perrin jumps into the battle, but is knocked unconscious. Perrin wakes up, and he and Egwene are tied up in front of someone that calls themselves the Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light. Another man comes into the tent, and the commander asks him, "Child Bar, report." And the man, who is apparently Child Biar, says there must be tons and tons of wolves that attacked us. Dozens and dozens of them, and many men attacking with them. They must all be dark friends. We must exterminate them all. And the Lord Captain Commander is like, you overestimate the number of wolves and men. There were probably not more than a few men at most, but a few wolves at most. And he introduces himself to Egwene and Perrin as Geofram Bornhold. You can just remember Bornhold. And he starts to question Perrin about what they're doing, and Bornhold starts getting more and more convinced that Perrin and Egwene are dark friends. And eventually he decides that they are prisoners, and they will be taken to Amador for interrogation. The other man, Child Biar, says they'll just slow the Children of the Light down from their march, and there's only one true penalty for dark friends: death. But Bornhold tells Biar not to be overzealous, and he advises Egwene to think of a better story for their reason for being here, preferably the truth. But he does make it clear that Perrin, before he was knocked unconscious, killed 2 Children of the Light in his rage, and the only thing that awaits Perrin, at least, is a hanging. Chapter 31 is titled Play for Your Supper. Rand and Mat continue traveling, and they do not have hardly any money, and what money they do have, they have to save in case there's an emergency. Rand mentions they could sell that ruby dagger, but Mat gets furious immediately and says, "You will not be taking this dagger from me. This is mine. We are not getting rid of it. We will sell the harp if we have to." Because remember, Rand has all of Tom's stuff that he was handed before the Myrddraal attacked. So they actually start pretending for real that they are apprentice gleemen, and they try to do performances through various towns and at farms and villages as they pass, in the hopes of performing in exchange for a meal and bed. But also, they do work. They offer to do farm work for different farms. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the farmers set their dogs on them to make them run away. They get to one farm where they get some work, and one of the daughters, Elsie Grinwell, starts flirting with Rand, and is like, "I don't know what my dad will do if he catches us like this," kind of thing. And so when they eventually leave, the mother is very happy to see them go. After a few more days of this, and I actually really like this chapter about their struggle to survive during this time, but eventually they hitch a ride on the back of a cart, and after a few days, they arrive at the town of Four Kings. Chapter 32 is titled Four Kings in Shadow. So they arrive at the Four Kings fairly late at night, and it's a little bit rougher than the previous places. They don't stop at the first inn. They stop at the fourth, just to like get into the town a little bit, so it's harder to find them if someone's following. And they know someone's following because in the towns that they passed before, they found out that there's someone asking about the two boys. And from the description of the man, Rand actually thinks it may be Paden Fane, surprisingly enough, the peddler. So they reach this inn, and it's a little rough. There's men laughing and talking and stuff, but the bartender the innkeeper rather, is very unfriendly. His bouncers seem very unfriendly to the point where Mat is worried they're going to get robbed. But eventually they allow Rand and Mat to play in exchange for very meager accommodations and food. Eventually, when everyone from the inn has left and there's no one else to perform to, Rand and Mat go to bed, having earned a room. And when they get to the room, Rand bars the door so that no one can get in at night, and finds that the windows also have iron bars. And as the night passes a little bit, there's sounds, and suddenly a man is trying to enter their room and tells them, "You will submit to the great Lord of the Dark." And he stabs at Rand, who tries to get away, and Rand is just filled with somewhat of fury and adrenaline. And as he's fighting the man, lightning strikes the room, and suddenly the entire wall that had the window has a giant hole in it, and they burst out, Rand and Mat. Mat being completely and utterly blind at this point from the lightning strike that he was looking straight at, and Rand sees bodies outside the wall where men were waiting for them before the lightning hit. And this whole time, Rand is feeling incredibly sick, which was why it was so difficult for him to fight back against this one person, even though he had this training from Lan. Additionally, when they had a brief conversation with the man who apparently was a dark friend, he said he can feel where the boys are, because he can feel this energy coming at them, or coming from them. And I think it is supposedly implied that is the taint from Shadar Logoth that Mat seems to have on him. Chapter 33 is titled The Dark Waits. Rand and Mat managed to get a ride from someone, and Mat starts saying, "My eyes are getting a little better," and Rand is starting to feel a little bit better too. The man that they're hitching a ride from says, "Well, you're about 2 days from Camlin. You can stay at my farm for the night," but Mat starts getting very suspicious that the man that gave him a ride is trying to rob them, and so the man is like, "Okay," and he leaves. And the boys start walking to Camlin. They go into a village on the way there, and they stop and sleep. And Rand dreams that he is back in the Four Kings, and the Dark Friend is there, but is dead. And Baalzamon appears, and he tells Rand that the Eye of the World will never serve him, and shoots a ball of flame into Rand's face. But Rand just awakes and understands Mat is having a nightmare right now, and he shakes Mat awake, assuming that, and it's kind of assumed they had the same nightmare at this point. And so daylight eventually comes. They get to another village and decide to go around it, so they didn't have any trouble. And they find another ride from a farmer. And as they get off, the man gives them 2 scarves out of the kindness of his heart, honestly. They get to another village, and they go up to an inn, and is just an exorbitant amount of money compared to what an inn should cost for them. But they do eventually agree to stay the one night because there was really no alternative. Yeah. And a young boy sits at their table when they're having breakfast the next morning and tells them the shadow will swallow them. And he runs away, and Rand and Mat know that they've been found, and they run again. And this continues on and on. They're constantly being noticed and approached by dark friends, most of whom probably want them dead. They find yet another village, and they start to perform for their room, but Rand suddenly gets very sick. Like, even more so than before. And he has a horrible fever and nightmares. And eventually a woman enters they're staying in a horse stable, because that's the only room there was. And this woman enters a stable and asks if Rand is ill, and then lunges at Mat. And her dagger gets stuck in a piece of wood, and the wood around it starts to blacken. And Mat has the ruby dagger up to her throat. But Rand convinces Mat, don't kill her, and they lock her up. Chapter 34 is titled The Last Village. As they get closer to Camlin, the road starts getting filled with a lot more people, and it turns out that a bunch of people are going to Camlin to see the false dragon Logain. The Aes Sedai captured him, and are going to parade him through the city as a show that they were able to capture a false dragon, and to show people this is what happens when you channel as a man. As they pass one of the villages, they overhear an innkeeper talking with someone, and they understand the other man is a Myrddraal. Cloak up so no one can see, and he's asking about people of Rand and Mat's description. And so they leave that town. As they keep going, and they hitch a ride with another farmer to get to Camlin, and the guy driving the cart is telling them about Queen Morghese. And you'll have to forgive me, it could be Morgase, Morgaz. I'm going to go with Morghese, because that's how I always said it in my head. But Queen Morghese rules Camlin, and therefore Andor. And she has an Aes Sedai who advises her, named Elaida. And again, Elaida, I don't know, I always called it Elaida in my head. So Queen Morghese has an Aes Sedai advisor named Elaida, and a daughter named Elaine, and a son named Gawyn. Yeah. So you find out, like, there's a guy named Taringale who married Morghese but was killed after fathering Elaine and Gawyn. These names will be more relevant later on in the story, but for now, I think it's just important to know there's a queen in Andor, and she has a daughter named Elaine, and an Aes Sedai advisor named Elaida. But eventually, Rand wakes up from having fallen asleep at some point, and realizes they have arrived in Camlin. Chapter 35 is titled Camlin. It might be Caemlyn, but I always called it Camlin, so you gotta deal with it. Camlin. I always thought of it that way because it's like Camelot, Camlin, but it is kind of spelled like Caemlyn, so whatever. But yeah, as they get to Camlin, they realize every other city, every other town that they've ever come across, peasants, minuscule in size. This is a ginormous city, far beyond that they have ever dared to think of before. As they approach the walls, the man driving the cart says that Rand should probably get rid of his heron-marked sword if he doesn't want any attention. And so Rand, puts that in the back of his mind, and they start asking for directions to the Queen's Blessing, since Tom told them to get there. And as they're walking, Rand notices a lot of people have, like, white or red cloth wrapped around swords. And so Rand decides that's a pretty good a pretty good thing to do to hide my heron mark, so people, don't come to me. Because remember, the mark of the heron on a sword is the mark of a blade master, and that draws a lot of attention from people that know what it is. So Rand goes into a store, and he doesn't really know which cloth to get, the white or red. And so he just decides to go for the cheaper one. So he buys some red cloth and cord, and wraps his sword in the red cloth, and continues on to the Queen's Blessing. And Rand shows the innkeeper, Basil Gill, the flute, and says, "We're friends of Tom." And he tells him the story, but Master Gill doesn't think that Tom is dead. He's like, "I haven't seen a corpse. He's fine." He offers to give them a room and food, and starts talking about Tom a little bit. He's like, yeah, Tom was actually a court bard here in Camelin, and he was a lover of Queen Morgase. However, his nephew got in trouble at some point, and Tom vanished. And when he came back again, he had to flee because the queen ordered his execution. Chapter 36 is titled Web of the Pattern. So Rand tells Master Gil that they're here to meet their friends, and they're going to head to Tar Valon if their friends don't show up. They get taken to a room in the attic out of the way, and Mat lies down and just refuses to move. He's suspicious of Gil, and he's very angry and honestly very pessimistic, saying they're never going to come, that kind of thing. And so Rand goes outside of the room by himself at this point. Rand finds out that the inn actually has a library, and so he goes into the library and he's like, wow, these are so many books. And then Rand realizes he's not by himself. Suddenly there's a giant creature there that looks like a Trolloc, and Rand panics and reaches for his sword, but the creature yells at him like, no, I'm not a Trolloc. My name is Loial. I'm an Ogier. And Rand realizes he is not, in fact, a Trolloc. He doesn't have the animal-like features. He appears to be like a giant person, like 10 feet tall kind of thing. Giant hands that would make a normal cup look like a little teacup kind of thing. Like if we were to hold a bowl with our hand, he would hold it between like two little tiny stubby fingers kind of thing. Absolutely massive. And Loial starts to explain what he's doing in Camelin. He's like, I left my steading, and a steading being the home of the Ogier. But he left without getting permission from the elders because he wanted to see and explore the world and go see the groves. And he's like, because I'm only 90 years old, I'm not allowed to go outside without their permission. But a lot has changed in my books since these books were written. A lot of them are thousands of years old. And Loial is surprised to see Rand, though, because Loial didn't expect to see an Aiel around here. But he's pretty surprised when Rand denies that he's Aiel and says, no, I'm from the Two Rivers. You might know it as Manetheren. And Loial's like, Manetheren. I didn't think they had people that looked like you there. And for some reason, Rand just starts telling Loial the truth. Like, everything. And eventually, Loial says, you're ta'veren, a person whose thread the pattern weaves, the threads of other lives around. And Loial just suddenly out of nowhere asks, can I travel with you? I wanna travel with a ta'veren. But Rand, realizing this is very dangerous, is like, no, thank you, but no. Yeah. And then it goes on to chapter 37, which is titled The Long Chase. So Lan, Moiraine, and Nynaeve are traveling towards Camelin looking for the person that still has their coin, which we know to be Perrin, but they don't. And eventually Moiraine gasps and halts, and she's like, the boy has lost his coin. But as they leave their camp in the morning, she sighs in relief and says, oh, he has it again. Which we know from the other chapters, that means Perrin had his belongings taken from him when he was captured, but he got the coin back. And as they continue, they find a White Cloak camp, the White Cloaks being a name for Children of the Light. And Moiraine decides we have to free him. And they divide up the tasks. Nynaeve's job is going to be to cut the ropes that the horses are tied to so that the horses scatter as soon as Moiraine causes a diversion. And Lan warns her, though, there's a bunch of wolves around, so be careful. And so Nynaeve, who was trusted to do this by Lan because she's so good at basically being undetected, goes up there and realizes, oh my god, I see Bella. That's Egwene's horse. We have to get her too. And so she takes Bella and another horse and then cuts the ropes of the horses. Moments later, Moiraine starts her diversion, which she didn't specify, but said Nynaeve would know it when she saw it. And Nynaeve did know it when she saw it, because lightning started crashing down onto the camp, and suddenly wolves started chasing the horses away, and it was just utter madness and chaos. And the only other thing I would mention is that when Nynaeve was cutting the lines of all the horses, she was like, if I miss a couple, it would probably be fine. But then she like rethinks, no, I don't like the idea that Lan won't be impressed if I don't succeed and cut every single one. So she does. And she seems to think herself in somewhat of a competition with Lan, because Lan was leaving earlier and Nynaeve didn't hear him go, and so now it's almost like a stealth contest between them. Anyway, chapter 38 is titled Rescue. And this follows Perrin and Egwene, but you get the sense that it went backwards a couple hours, that kind of thing. So this grand escape that Moiraine, Nynaeve, and Lan are doing has not happened yet. And so Perrin and Egwene have been with the White Cloaks for days as prisoners, and one night, Child Biar steps into their tent, and he offers to let Perrin go. And Perrin is like, what? But Biar is convinced that Perrin and Egwene are dark friends, and Perrin hesitates to accept because he realizes he's looking for an excuse to kill him. But suddenly, in his head, Perrin gets a message from Dapple, one of the wolves, and Dapple says, help is coming. And suddenly, Perrin sees the guards go down, and Lan steps into the tent and knocks out Child Biar and unties Egwene and Perrin. And then lightning crashes down as they look for Moiraine and see her just outside the camp. And Egwene asks where Mat and Rand are, but there's no time to answer. Lan and Nynaeve haven't come, Nynaeve hasn't come yet. Lan is ready to go look for her, but Moraine's like, no, we have to go. You swore oaths to me, Lan, and you will do what I say. But at that moment, Nynaeve comes through, crashing through the bushes with Bella and another horse, and all of them together flee the camp while the White Cloaks are confused. And as they retreat, Perrin feels Dapple touch his mind again, and Dapple tells Perrin, we'll meet again, and leaves. And it is at this point, Nynaeve is tending their wounds and sees that Perrin is very bruised, and is shocked a little bit because Perrin's eyes are bright gold, yellow. She's never seen this before. Moiraine seems to recognize it, but doesn't give any information to Nynaeve, and just says the eyes won't hurt him. Lan speaks up quietly to Perrin and says his eyes are not a thing of the Dark One. And Perrin starts telling him about Elyas, and Lan says he actually knew Elyas. Elyas was a warder before he started running with wolves, but had some trouble with the Red Ajah. Perrin says, I think he's okay, and Lan seems to be relieved at that. Chapter 39 is titled Weaving of the Web. We're back in Camlan, and Rand is there, and today it turns out is the day that the false dragon Logain will be presented to the queen as he's marched off to Tar Valon to be gentled. And Rand is like, well, I have nothing better to do while we wait, so this is a pretty good opportunity to see the queen of a country and Logain, the false dragon. He asks Mat if he wants to come, but Mat refuses. He just stays in his bed curled up under the blankets with his dagger. As Rand leaves the inn, the innkeeper tells him someone's been asking about Rand and his companions. Sounds like some kind of beggar, and I think it's implied to be Paden Fain again, looking for them. Anyway, Rand keeps going and sees that the inn is being watched by people that blame the queen and Elaida, her Aes Sedai advisor, for everything that's wrong in the city. And there's like a great tension in the city, and there's violence happening between people with red armbands and people with white armbands. And Rand finds out that the red armbands are people that support the queen, whereas the white are people that oppose the queen's decisions. And Rand remarks to himself like, wow, it's definitely very lucky that I picked the red one, because with how much Master Basil Gill likes the queen, if I had the white one, he might not have been so kind to us. Suddenly, Rand tries to find a good spot to watch Logain and everything, and hears drums and trumpets suddenly starting. And Rand climbs atop a wall, and there he sees it. Logain in a cage, being guarded by 4 Aes Sedai, who all seem to be looking at him very intently. And he kind of wonders out loud, like, why are they doing that? And someone says, well, that's because they are shielding him from the source of the one power. And Rand, very surprised that someone actually answered him, and surprised at that answer, loses his balance and topples backwards over the wall, and he hits his head on the ground and passes out. Chapter 40 is titled The Web Titans. Rand wakes up and finds that there's a girl with him, pretty close in age, as well as a boy who seems to look very similar to her, both beautiful people in their own way, and realizes they're probably related, and they're both very, very fancily dressed. And the girl starts helping Rand's cuts that he got from climbing and falling off the wall. And Rand realizes, oh my god, this is Elayne, the daughter heir of Andor, and that's her brother, Gawyn. And they start talking to each other, and suddenly another man appears and introduces himself as Galad, or Galad, I think it's Galad, because he came looking for them, because they went to go see Logain against the orders of Queen Morghese. Elayne says, don't tell the guards about this boy falling here, he just fell off the wall, but says Galad always does the quote-unquote right thing, regardless of who it hurts. And you get the sense that Elayne seems to think of this as a character flaw. And so Elayne and Gawyn agree that they need to sneak Rand out of the garden prior to the guards arriving. And they go up to a guard and come across an officer named Talonvor, who's like, oh my god, this boy got into our garden and into the palace. And Rand's like, oh shit, I'm in the palace. And the guard, Talonvor, is like, we have to lock him up until we can decide what to do with him. And Elayne is like, nope, you're going to take me to my mother right now. If you're going to put him in jail, I'm going to be in the jail too. And so suddenly they get a messenger that appears saying, hey, I need Elayne and Gawyn to come to the queen. And they're like, well, I guess we're going to the queen, like you said. And as Rand is walking, he notices that even though it's not really the time for it, the gardens are very green, and there are all kinds of flowers in here, regardless of the season at which they would normally bloom. And Elayne tells him that's the work of Elaida, the Aes Sedai advisor. And so they keep going, and they eventually approach the queen and find Elaida and Lord Gareth there. And Morghese starts lecturing Elayne and Gawyn about responsibilities and disobeying orders, and then turns her attention to Rand. And so Elayne starts saying, oh, this is Rand al'Thor. He's a loyal Anderman, one of our citizens. And he's from the Two Rivers. And, Queen Morghese is like, I don't think he's very loyal then, because the Two Rivers don't really consider themselves part of Andor. I haven't sent anyone to collect taxes there in hundreds of years. Elaida speaks up, the Aes Sedai, and says he doesn't look like he's from the Two Rivers, and he's carrying a heron-marked blade. He certainly does not appear to be the shepherd he says he is. And then Elaida speaks in a different voice and announces that Rand will be at the center of the turmoil the world will soon face. And that seems to be a foretelling of some kind. Her advisor, the Captain General, says we should probably lock him up, until Logain and them are gone at least. But Queen Morghese is like, I recognize his accent. It is from the Two Rivers. I do believe him, even though it seems weird. So she tells Rand, you just need to be more careful in the future. And Elayne and Gawyn escort Rand out. And Elaine's like, you're pretty handsome, and smiles at him. And Gawyn's, chuckling to himself. Rand asks Gawyn, why does no one believe that I'm from the Two Rivers whenever I say this? And Gawyn says, well, you look like an Aiel. Something that I missed that's really important is that the Queen, Morghese, actually ordered Elaida to tell her a foretelling if she was able, and to speak it clearly. And so Aleda says, and it's like 2 lines, so I'm just going to read it. She said, "The Dark One stirs in Sheo Ghul. The shadow lies across the pattern, and the future is balanced on the point of a pin. This one is dangerous. This I foretell and swear under the light that I can say no clearer. From this day Andor marches towards pain and division. The shadow has yet to darken to its blackest, and I cannot see if the light will come after. Where the world has wept one tear, it will weep thousands. This I foretell." And then, in barely a whisper, she says, "This too I foretell. Pain and division come to the whole world, and this man stands at the heart of it. I obey the queen and speak it clearly." And so she followed the queen's orders by speaking it clearly, but she said it so quietly that the queen could not hear that portion. So Aleda basically kept that part of her prophecy to herself. And that is the end of that chapter.